24 has now finally arrived.
From knockouts to tap-outs.
It's all over!
Inside the octagon and beyond.
Is this not real now? Are we pretending?
We're rich, baby. Break out the red panties.
This is the MMA Report with John Pollock.
Unbelievable! Here we go!
It's the MMA Report. I'm your host, John Pollock. Thank you for tuning in. It is UFC 211 Fight Week. It is being promoted as the best card the UFC has put together in 2017, and that is not promotional hyperbole. It's an outstanding fight card. We're going to be going into that card in depth over the next hour. Thank you for joining us. As always, we'll be joined by Cody Saftic. Never a shortage of topics to discuss, many of them surrounding Dana White, and maybe it'll be a segment we call Let's Cool Our Brakes on some of these public statements that are being made. But lots more to come on this week's edition of the show. We'll have a full preview of UFC 211, and as always, we kick things off with the news of the week.
This just in.
Well, the UFC's biggest card thus far of 2017 goes into Saturday with one casualty, and that has been a flyweight bout involving Sergio Pettis and Henry Cejudo being scratched from the pay-per-view portion on Saturday. MMA Fighting reported that Cejudo suffered a hand injury, with the former flyweight title contender telling the website that he suffered the injury 2 weeks ago, rested the hand since then threw a punch earlier this week with a pain shooting through the hand. Cejudo then went on to state that he has found that he has a cyst in his wrist and a ruptured capsule and could be facing a ligament tear. As a result, the fight is off, and the middleweight bout between David Branch and Christoph Jotko has been moved from the prelims to the pay-per-view. UFC President Dana White spoke publicly this week about the trying negotiations he is in the middle of involving Floyd Mayweather Jr. and Conor McGregor. White, who was in attendance for Saul Canelo Alvarez's dominant victory over Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. this past weekend, stated that they lost their date for Mayweather and McGregor after the announcement that Canelo will fight Gennady Golovkin on September 16th. White went into detail about the negotiations when speaking on The Herd with Colin Cowherd this week, and that he will walk away if necessary from the fight.
Definitely both sides. It's not just Mayweather. It's both sides of this thing are going to be hard to get done. And absolutely, there's going to be a point where I'm done. This isn't what I do. This isn't my business, and I'm definitely going to walk away.
So this ties in nicely because Dana White had more to say during the week, announcing to Fox Sports Australia that the fight between Michael Bisping and George St-Pierre, which never had a date, is now off. White added that they are not going to wait around for St-Pierre, that the division has to move on, and that Yoel Romero will get the next title fight. As of this moment, there has been no response from either Michael Bisping or George St-Pierre. We will discuss this in much more detail with Cody Saftic, but never discount the use of media outlets by one UFC president, Dana White. The worst announcement of an Ultimate Fighter season concluded this past week with the news that the next season of Tough, I believe this is season 87 coming up, will be built around the crowning of a women's 125-pound flyweight champion. This time, the news was true, because last week featured one of the bigger media blunders by the UFC in quite some time, because the news of the season and introduction of the weight class was first broken by the UFC, then walked back by the UFC, who said the announcement was premature and they had not finalized the plans. So this week, ESPNW got the heads up that the season is a go, and this time was legitimate. Next weekend's Bellator event in London, England has suffered a blow, as the Daily Telegraph reported that Michael Venom Page has suffered a knee injury and his fight with Derek Anderson has been taken off the card at the O2 Arena. The show will feature Rory MacDonald's Bellator debut against Paul Daley and former light heavyweight champion Liam McGeary fighting Linton Vassell. Scott Coker also added the following note for the main event and what the two welterweights will be fighting for.
If you look at our division in the 170-pound weight class, I think it clearly is one of our strongest divisions, and I think it's probably the strongest division of the welterweights of any leagues currently out there. You look at the fight between Douglas Lima and Lorenz Larkin in New York. We have other prospects, Michael Venom Page, Derek Anderson. We have Paul, we have Rory. But this fight clearly will be for the number one contender spot. We'll fight the winner of Douglas Lima versus Lorenz Larkin in New York on June 24th.
On Friday, the UFC will hold another of their major press conferences to announce all of their major fights for the summer. It's expected that Daniel Cormier and John Jones will be in attendance to officially announce their rematch for July 29th among the fight announcements. And Joseph Benavidez announced that he has suffered an injury. He's off the June 11th Fight Night card in New Zealand, where he was to fight Ben Nguyen. The UFC has since announced that Tim Elliott will step in to fight Nguyen next month on the same card.
There's a song from AC/DC that calls TNT, but I did ATT. So I'm ATT, I'm dynamite, I'm ATT, I win this fight, I'm ATT, I'm power load, I'm ATT, watch me explode. I'm good on that, huh? That was good, huh?
'Cause I'm TNT, I'm dynamite, TNT, and I'll win that fight, TNT, I'm a power load.
That was Junior Dos Santos speaking to MMAJunkie.com. And the show continues, and we are now joined in his official seat here on the MMA Report in our beautiful studios is Cody Saftic of the Fight Network. What's going on, Cody?
Yes, another week back, John, with another big UFC card and another victory for Team Dillashaw, so it seems like things are right where they should be.
I know. You and I, again, the two people watching The Ultimate Fighter, and again, a big Team Dillashaw victory. We will chat about Ultimate Fighter, but Cody, I have not been this excited for a UFC card in months. I cannot wait for this card on Saturday. Even the loss of Sergio Pettis and Henry Cejudo, this card's still incredible. Like, let's give credit where it is due. This is a dynamite card in Dallas on Saturday.
Yeah, the whole card's just looking really good. And you factor in how good Cejudo versus Pettis really was. I mean, especially on an average card. And that fight got canceled. And a lot of times people will be like, oh, here it starts. It's almost like a collective, yeah, well, this guy's still pretty good. I mean, it's not even losing that much. And bumping up Jocko versus Dave Branch to the main card, I don't think that's the best fight that I would have put up. But obviously, I think they want to keep Dustin Poirier versus Eddie Alvarez on the prelims for a reason.
Yeah,
so you bump up Branch and Jocko, and it's a good fight.
They never move those main events from Fight Pass and FS. Or well, this time it's FX actually that's airing it. That I'm fine with Alvarez and Poirier as that main event. I mean, regardless, you're watching everything. At least you and I are. But this is a great card. We're going to get to that. But first off, let's address the story that, you know, everyone's just going crazy with. And that was UFC president Dana White snapping his fingers. And all of a sudden, Michael Bisping, George St-Pierre, he says, is off. Call me crazy, Cody. But what is the size of the list of statements Dana White has made that don't ultimately come to fruition? I mean, I think it's just a little getting ahead of ourselves to just assume that this fight's off, to assume that George St-Pierre is going to shrug his shoulders and say, cool. And even more, the biggest one, that Michael Bisping is just going to sign on a dotted line to fight Yoel Romero for a fraction of the money that this George St-Pierre fight represents. You think that? I don't think that's an easy sell to Michael Bisping, that all of a sudden you're just going to fight Yoel Romero, and this fight that you have been hoping for, that we held a press conference to announce, that is not going to happen now.
But there was a lot of posturing on Michael Bisping's part when he was saying, well, if George St-Pierre doesn't hurry up and sign the contract, I'm just going to give it to Yoel Romero.
Yeah,
so I think for a lot of part,
I think you can read between the lines on that one. I mean, it was clear when this press conference happened, hindsight being what it was, this press conference never should have happened. They should have had a date. They knew George didn't want to fight in July, but they felt they would be able to pressure him, even publicly, into getting that July date. He wasn't ready for July. Now George is saying anytime after October the 1st. I don't disagree that this fight was a massive headache, and every middleweight contender should have been pissed about the delays of this fight. But I don't think it's just solved like that just because Dana says this is happening. I mean, a couple of months ago, he was stating he had a better chance of being the backup quarterback for Tom Brady than Floyd Mayweather and Conor McGregor fighting, and he was in the negotiations. Like, you have to view these public statements for what they are at times. This is all strategic, and for Michael Bisping, zero incentive to just accept a fight with Yoel Romero unless they make it financially worth his while.
Yeah, that's exactly it. I think fans by this point certainly have figured that out with Dana White. If he says that the UFC is not for sale, it's very much for sale. If the women are never going to fight in the UFC, there's a high likelihood that they will. And if Tito Ortiz and Misha Cherkinov are no longer welcome in the UFC, they've got contracts sitting on their doorsteps, John. Whatever he says, you got to take it with a grain of salt. I mean, very much so. You're just trying to dominate these headlines, dominate the publicity. And Dana White, he's always been, I don't want to say bigger than the sport, but that's his persona. His persona is very much that mean president of the big bad company. And you see him getting a lot more attention than other major sports organizations, their presidents, because he's outspoken and because of his character. And now he goes out there and sells this. And I think for the UFC, this was a great idea. Hey, we're going to put George St-Pierre and Michael Bisping together. If you're Michael Bisping, this is a big payday. This is the money fight you thought you deserved. And if you only got a couple fights left in your career, this is a fantastic way to cap off what's been a very solid career for Michael Bisping. But there's no guarantees ever. And for him to say, well, I'll take on Yoel Romero, well, now you got to prove it. Now you got to physically go take on Yoel Romero. The biggest question I have going through with this is if you're George St-Pierre, you're not coming back at 185 pounds for no reason. You're not coming back because you're that much bigger. You're coming back at 185 pounds solely because you were offered this title fight with Michael Bisping. If you're not fighting Michael Bisping and you just put on a whole bunch of muscle mass and you're much bigger than you were when you're fighting at 170, where do you go now? If he doesn't fight Michael Bisping, what other middleweight, other than Anderson Silva, I suppose, does he possibly fight? And I just don't think those are good fights for him. He should probably go down to 170 and try to take a fight there somewhere anyways. But I think they all just shot themselves in the foot. And my final thing on this is we talk about this every single week, how it was a bad idea, how the fight could fall off, and how it didn't really make a whole lot of sense. So this happening, I don't think anybody's really surprised that all of a sudden, Bisping, George St-Pierre, yeah, that's off. That really doesn't shock me.
I view this more as still posturing. I mean, it wasn't all that long ago. I mean, Misha Cherkinov is just watching on the internet as Dana White says, yeah, we're not going to be doing business with him. He's going to be done. And what happens? Poof! Back in our light heavyweight division.
New 6-fight deal. All right.
It's just like, folks, maybe this fight doesn't happen. Maybe it doesn't. But to just completely go with what he states in a public interview as not being strategic at times, he clearly has no problem using the media to get his message across and pressure guys into fights, into situations. So it could very well be that they have all the hope in the world of keeping this fight together, just not extending it to November. So
yeah,
maybe we will know as early as Friday when they're having this super big press conference and to announce all the big fights. And hey, maybe they're going to give Michael Bisping such an enticing offer to fight Yoel Romero that he's like, cool, I'm not going to make $2.5 million that I would have against George, but you give me this incentive and I'm loaded with support on this pay-per-view. Pay-per-view will do healthy. Maybe he goes ahead with that.
Yeah, even then, I'm getting half as much money to take on
I'd be furious if I'm Michael
twice
Bisping.
as big of a challenge. Yeah, I'd be furious too. You got to start looking at the red flags now. And judging by the last week of publicity and the headlines that have been dominating, if Dana White now comes out and says Chuck Liddell is definitely not making a return to action, then I will know Chuck Liddell's making a return to action, John, and that would list that in the hate it section of the love it or hate it.
Well, I don't know if that one's going to happen in the UFC.
I think him and Matt Hughes have got as good of a shot right now as finding opponents as almost anybody.
Final point on this. If George were to then, out of all of this, Bisping fight falls apart. He, as you stated, middleweight doesn't make a whole lot of sense, and he even hints at a return at welterweight. You think Tyron Woodley is jumping at the shot to fight Damian Maia or Jorge Masvidal, knowing that George is now eyeing a welterweight return? You're going to have the same problem at that division where Tyron Woodley is going to be looking for the biggest financially rewarding fight, and St-Pierre wins that one by 18 country miles.
Yeah, but I think about this too. A lot of people are saying, okay, well, you know what? Masvidal should have got the shot. Maia should have got the shot. He's taking on Masvidal. Why is he doing that? You got even Woodley coming out and saying, you know, that was a really stupid idea for him to take Masvidal. Woodley has no contenders, and everyone's saying Damian Maia should be the next guy for the shot. But what you do is you give him this fight with George Masvidal. Now, the talks are obviously, well, the winner of this is going to take on the champion. Very important to note, those are just the talks amongst the fans. Nobody has said this is a title eliminator.
No.
Nobody's said the winner of this fight gets a title shot. And if you're Damian Maia, by the way, even if he beats George Masvidal, then by the time that title fight comes, he will have turned 40 years old. He's currently 39 and a half. He's near 40 years old, but he sits on the sideline. And for a lot of people, it's like, well, why not make this a title eliminator? These are probably the next two best guys. Well, because there's that George St-Pierre option. The option is we're going to make the biggest fight possible. And if George isn't fighting Bisping and we can put George versus Woodley together and that's the route that we're going to go, then we're going to take that route. And it's just very frustrating for Demian Maia to win 6 in a row, to win 7 in a row, and then continuously get passed over because, well, there's a bigger money fight that we can put together at this time. Fans want to see the number one contender get a shot. That's why Yoel Romero is ultimately going to get this shot, and fans should be excited about it. But there's no denying that a fight with George St-Pierre would do bigger business. Likewise, a fight with Tyron Woodley and George St-Pierre would do bigger business. And in this day and age, that's going to dominate every single time. So I'd be very worried if I was 39-year-old Demian Maia getting ready for another crazy, difficult fight with the promise of, well, maybe something will come out of this, because maybe is not a guarantee in this sport.
What's your theory on why the UFC has been so hardline at middleweight at the installation of an interim championship? Because they have not been shy over the last 18 months of creating interim titles when there was very little need for them in this. And believe me, I hate interim titles. I genuinely they're just a waste to me. But there is a financial incentive for these fighters to want them. And an interim title, Cody, in this unique scenario at middleweight, solved a lot of problems. You can work out this Bisping St-Pierre fight as they wait forever to do this fight, and you at least keep this division moving. You would have gotten Yoel Romero and Anderson Silva in June at the Brazil card. You would have at least had a title that was in circulation that these fighters are going after. There's not an affinity for the undisputed championship. There is a desire and a goal for the pay-per-view points. That's what these titles represent to these fighters. It is reward for their fights in a monetary value. And that's an interim title. To me, it was a real quick fix to a lot of problems here. And I don't know why they were so against it in this scenario when in other weight classes they have John Jones and Ovince St. Preux was for an interim title.
Yeah, well, see, you got a difficult situation here because in that case, you've got John Jones, who should be the undisputed champion, who's now fighting for an interim version of the title that, rightfully so, he should have anyways. I don't think the UFC wants to go out and put on these interim titles on the line. In that case, though, well, it's John Jones. We can't have John Jones fighting Ovince St. Preux in a non-title fight, considering that he's never lost the title, so you put the title on the line. The other thing that they've gone with these interim titles is that they're creating them for divisions that Conor McGregor has left behind. He's not ever going back to 145 pounds. So you have the last guy that Conor McGregor beat at that weight class is your number one contender. Jose Aldo is the best 145 pounder outside of Conor McGregor. So you put an interim title on the line. 155 pounds, we don't know when McGregor's coming back. So you put an interim title on the line. 185 pounds, there's not an issue here where the champion's gone or the champion's injured or he's fighting elsewhere. You have a perfectly healthy champion who's quite simply just sitting on the sidelines waiting for a fight. So it becomes too convoluted. There's too many interim titles. There's too many, we got the full champion, then we got, it's like when you look at boxing, you got the WBA, the regular champion, the WBA silver champion, the WBA super champion. There's just so many versions
I understand
of the same title.
It's complicated and it's not ideal, but to me,
this would have been a good time to do it. But how many other interim titles do you already have?
How do you strip Conor of the featherweight title, hand it to Aldo, and create an interim title at the same time for Holloway and Anthony Pettis?
Yeah, well,
why?
Yeah, fair
Aldo
enough.
wasn't hurt.
Fair enough. But who's Aldo going to fight? Because he only wants to fight Conor McGregor.
The winner of Pettis and Holloway. I mean, you had your fight the second Holloway beat Pettis for that featherweight title. Why was that an interim title fight?
Listen, nobody knows. So it's creating too much confusion. I think if you're the UFC, then all of a sudden you have Anderson Silva saying, well, we want another interim title and I want you to put me in the interim title fight against Yoel Romero. If you're the UFC, you're like, no, man, no. We're not creating another one just so that you can fight for a title. So I get where they're putting their foot down. It's just also confusing because this would have been one of those situations where the interim title probably would have helped. But they created them in so many other convoluted divisions right now that they just couldn't do it.
I think they really overthought this whole middleweight debacle. I mean, no scenario, it was the lesser of two evils, but to me, the interim title, it clears up a lot of issues. Every middleweight that has been, the MMA hour has become the disgruntled middleweight division hour. Every week, a new middleweight was on, and the common thread was create an interim title.
Yeah.
Let Bisping and listen, these guys are not dumb. They understand the financial incentive of Bisping St-Pierre, but don't handicap our division at the expense of this. Give us a toy to play with while they are off in the corner playing with theirs.
Fair, but if you're the UFC and you go out and you sign George St-Pierre, do you think George St-Pierre up front told them, I'm not going to be ready to fight for at least a year and a bit? It's like, no. The conversation was obviously, do you want to return to MMA? Yes. You would like to return? Okay. You go over the terms of the deal. Okay. We're going to give you a little bit of extra money because you're not getting the sponsorship. Whatever the terms are. But presumably this guy's in shape. Presumably this guy's in the gym. Presumably he's training for a return. So for them just to sign the guy.
But Cody, there was no date announced. So that clearly was a conversation. Hey, we want you for July 8th. And George would not commit to that. So when that press conference happened with no date attached, that was clearly a sticking point at that time in March. And it still is.
Okay, fair enough. But you have Michael Bisping going on record and saying, I never asked to fight George St-Pierre. George St-Pierre asked to fight me. George St-Pierre was giving a list of fighters and he specifically said, I want to fight Michael Bisping. George St-Pierre didn't take this list of fighters and says, hey guys, I'm not going to be able to fight for a year from now, so why don't we look at names in a year from now when I'm actually ready. He looked at the list and said, I want Michael Bisping because he's currently the middleweight champion. He must have thought, if I'm picking Michael Bisping is now going to be sat on the sidelines, and I'm not ready to fight for a year, so I'm going to sit him on the sidelines for a year? That makes no sense. Surely George must have known something. No, he didn't. He signed this fight thinking I'm going to come back. Then he realized what everybody's saying online. Geez, Michael Bisping's actually quite a bit bigger than me. Geez, you know what? Just like he always used to say back in the day, if I'm going up to middleweight, I got to put on some muscle. I got to change the dynamics of my body so that I can be a full-fledged 185 pounder. So he's done that. You see these videos of him hitting the bag online. He's trying to get bigger, and getting bigger takes time. So he's taking his sweet ass time. But as a result, this division's sitting on the sidelines. He's the one that chose to fight Michael Bisping. The UFC didn't come to him and say, listen, George, we really want you to fight Bisping. They came to him and said, listen, George, we really want you to fight. And whereas he could have accepted something, this was the fight he wanted. Sure, he would have wanted to fight a Conor McGregor. Sure, he maybe would have wanted a shot at the welterweight championship. But he saw the path at 185 to be easier than the path at 170, and he specifically chose this. If you're Michael Bisping, you can't fault the guy for saying, geez, I can make 3-4 times.
I don't fault Michael Bisping one bit in this whole story. Not at all.
I almost feel for him because he just had this golden lottery ticket stripped away from him and now gets Yoel Romero, which is obviously a much more difficult fight, at least in my opinion.
Yeah, and I mean, if this thing gets really combative in these negotiations, you've had Michael Bisping publicly give that deadline to George, or else he will fight Yoel. And now your company could hold you to that, saying, "Hey, you said you would fight Yoel by July," when Bisping was very much on the side of the UFC to just coax George in the fighting in July.
Yeah, that's what he should have done. Just kept running his mouth, kept talking, but as a result, he did set that deadline. And if you're Michael Bisping, you're also someone who's no spring chicken. You've been fighting in the UFC for a very long time. Surely he wants to fight sooner rather than later. He just doesn't
this George
want to
fight. This was his gold watch. This was his prize at the end of the run, and it wouldn't have surprised me if that was the last fight for Michael Bisping. You cash out big with George, and now that's in the air.
Yeah, that's exactly it. But if you're George St-Pierre, this is a blown opportunity for you too, because if Yoel Romero goes out and he smokes Michael Bisping, you don't want to fight Yoel Romero for the 185-pound title. And now your chances of fighting for another world title, winning 2 world titles at 2 different weight classes, that's gone now. You fighting at 185 might be gone now unless it's a one-off super fight. In fact, the only thing that really makes sense if you're George St-Pierre is taking on Nick Diaz, because at least Nick Diaz doesn't want to fight in 5-6 years. At least we're in a similar boat that we're both coming off long layoffs. But when you talk to a lot of fans, that intrigue for a Diaz versus St-Pierre rematch just quite simply isn't really there at the moment. So the UFC is going to have some growing pains to work out.
Let's solve all of the UFC's problems. Dana White also, he was at the Canelo Alvarez, Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. fight over the weekend, and then said afterwards, when the Gennady Golovkin Canelo fight was announced for September 16th, that they have lost their date because that was what they were targeting for Mayweather and Conor McGregor. Then went on Colin Cowherd's show and again said negotiations are a mess and he's willing to walk away. Again, I think this is a lot of posturing that Dana White does utilize the media for to get his message across. I don't know where the negotiations are, but as you're looking at this realistically, do you feel September the 16th is completely out of the question now? And what is the next step in this fight? Is Conor McGregor realistically in line for this fight, or with George St-Pierre being opened up, is there an incentive for Conor McGregor? That is the biggest fight the UFC can promote, is Conor and George St-Pierre at Madison Square Garden in November. Is that something you work towards, because you would figure it's not the same as a Mayweather fight for Conor, but that's not too bad of a consolation prize either. Yeah,
but you also got to look at that golden ticket for Conor McGregor. If I'm going to take on the best boxer and I'm looking at, let's say it's between a $50 and a $100 million payday, I can now take on George St. Pierre and, get paid $10 or $20 million. But if George St. Pierre takes me down and holds me down and pounds me, is that option for the Mayweather fight still there? Are people going to think, oh, well, George St. Pierre's a wrestler. What would he have done if someone wanted to stand in front of him? Yeah, we still have that intrigue. He's as hot as he's ever been right now. Conor knows that. He's trying to bank off that one profitable fight, that one real profitable fight, and obviously that's with Floyd Mayweather. But you know me, John, and I've been saying for a long time now, this fight with Floyd Mayweather is not going to happen because there's too many moving parts in place, and you got to look at the fact that Floyd Mayweather versus Manny Pacquiao, that was the fight to put together. That was the fight of the century. That was the fight that people literally clamored for 5-6 years, and it was always the same thing. Oh, it's signed. Oh, it's going to be signed. Oh, this is the potential date. Oh, Floyd's just asking for 60-40 cut. No, it turns out it's an 80-20 cut. No, the fight's off. No, they're going to fight someone else. No, the fight's off. And it's just the same thing. Over and over, over and over. They use the media. Of course they do. And the media reports that the fight is close, that the fight is almost finalized. Dana White one day says the fight's not going to happen. The next day he's saying on Conan O'Brien, oh wow, this is a real possibility. They both really want to fight each other. Oh yeah, no, it's not happening anymore. Oh yeah, the possibility's back. You just keep playing with that idea. You dominate the headlines. You keep in the public's perception. But I just don't see the fight realistically getting put together. And even when Dana comes out and says they both really want to fight each other, but just, there's so much, you got to get their side on board in this. If they're both down to fight each other and they're both standing to make $75 million each, then what's the issue? The issue is the UFC's got to get a cut of that, and the UFC's got to promote something, and then you got to think of cross promotion. Now you got to get a date. The September date is not going to work. It was never going to work. It was always just a bait. It was always just an idea to get fans exciting. Boxing's better now than it's been in a long time. People are talking about boxing. And this McGregor thing, it helps out. They're coming off a huge weekend where Canelo versus Chavez Jr. reportedly did 1 million buys. The weekend before, you got Anthony Joshua, seems to be a massive heavyweight star, certainly in Europe. He's coming over here. He's going to start fighting in America. They're building the sport up. And this is good for them, having boxing headlines finally really starting to hit the mainstream of, well, Floyd Mayweather might fight Conor McGregor. This is good for them. This is good for them. They don't need to physically put this fight together. They're not going to put this fight together now, especially now that Triple G, Gennady Golovkin versus Canelo Alvarez, which seemingly would be another 1 million pay-per-view buy card. There's no need, and it'll just get pushed off. So McGregor versus Mayweather, does it happen? There's always going to be that certain possibility, but I would look for this to happen another 2 years down the road.
As these negotiations continue, I mean, they're unlike the Manny Pacquiao negotiations where it was always a fight of who was going to be the controlling side. In this, it's pretty clear cut that the Mayweather camp holds the leverage in all of this.
Wait, see, sorry to cut you off, but this is where I'm thinking there's a big disagreement. I think if you're Conor McGregor, you look at the fact that I could fight Floyd, but I could also fight Manny, and hell, I could fight Amir Khan, and I can come back to the UFC and I can fight Khabib or Tony Ferguson or any of these guys and still have a good fight. If you're Floyd Mayweather, there's really only the one fight. You know what people are saying? Well, maybe he'll fight the winner of Triple G versus Canelo. I can assure you, people,
that's not
Floyd
happening.
Mayweather is not fighting either one of those guys.
God bless Oscar, the promoter, but that's not happening.
Never, ever, 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 ever. And he realizes this. He's looking at it and he's saying, okay, I'm 49-0. I really realistically need the one fight. But I'm young. I'm an old guy. And I got these young, up-and-comer, world champion, guys that are twice my size, guys that are getting just as fast as me. I'm known for my speed, but I'm 39 years old now, getting a little bit older. Conor McGregor is a fight that people are seemingly interested in. That would be the easiest fight that I've boxed in my professional career for at least the last 10 or 15 years. This is the fight. But if you're Conor, you don't need to put this fight down with Mayweather. And Mayweather was saying the same thing with Pacquiao. I'm the A side, you're the B side. And as soon as you accept that, we can put this fight together. But Pacquiao said, no, I'm not just some B side for you. And what's the result? You get Floyd Mayweather versus Victor Ortiz, or Roberto Guerrero, or Marcos Maidana. And those don't sell very well now, do they? Marcos Maidana 2 actually didn't do too bad. But those fights didn't really sell. Him versus Andre Berto, the last fight, hardly sold at all. guess what? You need 2 A sides, John. You can't just have an A side and a B side at that level if you want to make it a mega pay-per-view. You need 2 A sides. So for him to tell Conor McGregor, well, I'm the A side and you're the B side, no, you guys are both the A side. The sooner you both realize that and you're willing to split it 50-50, the sooner you can make this massive, massive fight and get paid a massive amount of money. But ego is just going to jump in the way every time, and you have to admit that you're the B side and accept an 80-20 or a 70-30 cut. No, you don't have to accept that. So that's, I think, the biggest roadblock here is that egos get in the way of it. That just like the same thing you're saying with the Manny Pacquiao fight. He believes he's the A side. The Mayweather camp believes he's the A side. And maybe he is, but they need they need Conor McGregor as much as Conor McGregor needs them. And for that reason, just accept that you're both the reason why people want to tune into this fight. You both have respective audiences that you're bringing into this fight, and just split the deal 50-50. There's no lost money here. The difference between $25 million to a guy like Floyd Mayweather is not that much. So just accept the 75 instead of the 100 and move on. If you wanted to make the fight that bad. But they don't, because it's more of a business. It's more of a, how much money can I get out of this? No offense, and I do like boxing, but that last fight, Canelo versus Chavez Jr., it sold 1 million. That fight was awful. Very bad. Very, very, very bad. That's bad for the sport. You don't want to have all these people tune in and have it to be a stinker, but it was the same thing with Mayweather versus Pacquiao. All these people buy it, and the fight's lackluster. That it's just a business. It's all about how can I sell this, have as much intrigue as possible, and make as much money as possible. It's a show. That's all it is. Entertainment. You know, they're selling people wolf tickets in the words of Nick Diaz.
I mean, and that has been at the root of combat sports from the very beginning. I mean, just great fights on paper. They're awesome to watch. It doesn't equal box office success. I will rave about this card on Saturday from now until the pay-per-view begins. You cannot convince me that this pay-per-view is doing any phenomenal numbers.
No, you're absolutely right there. 100%. Yeah, it's a good card. We look at it and they're fun fights, but could any of these fights be a stinker? Yeah, because it's just on paper. And on paper, is this a good, solid card? A lot of fans are saying, wow, I'm really pumped up for this card. I'm really excited for this card. A friend of mine got in a car accident the other day, and the first thing he wrote is, thank God I didn't die because I can still catch UFC 211 this weekend. People are pumped. Yeah, I know,
hope your
right?
friend's okay.
He is okay. People are pumped up. They do like the card. But that being said, is it a
quote-unquote deepest card of the year is probably, I think, tops
350?
350. 350, 375 tops, I think, for this card, which, you know, it's still a show that you look at this on paper. And I mean, when I say UFC 211 to you, the fight that jumps out at you the most, because there are multiples here. What is the fight for you on Saturday?
The fight for me is Eddie Alvarez, Justin Poirier. I think that you're getting it on free TV. It's a fight that basically screams entertainment. I mean, you had Robin Black naming a whole scale based on risk and danger on Eddie Alvarez, and I think Dustin Poirier, they match up good together. They're two guys that like to stand in the pocket. They both have good wrestling, and for that reason, it probably negates itself, and you're going to have a good stand-up match. Masvidal versus Damian Maia is a fantastic fight, but once again, like we're talking about, that's on paper. But if the fight plays out, Damian Maia goes out there, scores a takedown. In transition, he gets the back. He locks up the body triangle, and he's on George Masvidal's back. And Masvidal can't get him off the back. Now, round 1 ends. Round 2, he gets himself a takedown. He takes the back. Once Damian Maia is on your back, that's pretty much about it. You're not getting him off. And all of a sudden, you're down 2 rounds.
There's nothing I find more entertaining than Damian Maia when he's got your back. But, I mean,
all I'm saying is,
to me, the takedown defense of Jorge Masvidal is, I mean, that's a fascinating element to this fight of Damian Maia actually getting him down to the ground.
Well, Damian Maia scored at least 1 takedown in his last 11 fights. And you look at guys like John Fitch, he took down 7 times. Jake Shields, yeah, he lost that fight, but he took down Jake Shields. Rory MacDonald, he took down Rory MacDonald twice.
Yep.
Ryan LaFleur, he took Ryan LaFleur down 5 times. If he wants you down, seemingly, he will get you down. It doesn't matter if you have this wrestling base. What I look at is, if you look at the last round in the Ryan LaFleur fight, 5-round fight, but in the 5th round, he's so tired from trying to get these takedowns, and the fact that he wasn't able to put away Ryan LaFleur, he's zapped. If that fight's got 1 minute, maybe 2 minutes left in it, Ryan LaFleur TKOs him. Beyond that, LaFleur had won that 5th round. If you look at his fight with Matt Brown, by the 3rd round, he's tired. He gets stuffed on a takedown. He gets hit with a hard shot. Problem is, Matt Brown has that willingness to engage in the wrestling department with him. Gunnar Nelson had a willingness to engage in the grappling department with him because he had great credentials. You got to be the guy that very much says, sprawl and brawl, stuff the takedown and get away. Because can Damian Maia take you down? Absolutely. But does Damian Maia tire the longer fights goes? Yes. And the last time we saw him lose a fight, the last time we saw him lose fights, Rory MacDonald was able to stuff the takedowns eventually, get taken down early.
And got dominated in the first.
Exactly. But eventually, keep the distance, stuff the takedown. He'll tire himself out from trying to get the takedowns, and then you can sprawl and brawl this guy. The last fight he lost at 185 pounds versus Chris Weidman was the last fight he never scored a single takedown in. So you've got to be able to keep the fight standing. Can Masvidal keep the fight standing? Yeah. And if he does keep the fight standing, can he beat him up? Yeah. If this is a 5-rounder, I think I'd be very much on Jorge Masvidal. You look at the fact that it's a 3-rounder, and can Damian Maia just steal 2 rounds? Absolutely, because he realistically only needs 2 takedowns. 1 in the first, holds you down. 1 in the second, holds you down. And now you're fighting out of a hole. So that fight is extremely interesting to me. But will it be fight of the night? Will it be some crazy entertaining brawl? It might be, or it could be a complete stinker. And for that reason, I'd have to say Poirier versus Alvarez seems a lot more like it's going to guarantee you action. But I'm not going to lie. I look at this entire card, and obviously we lost the Cejudo fight, so there's only 13 fights now. But they're all competitive, all of them. Even the biggest underdog on the entire card, Marco Polo Reyes versus James Vick. That is a good fight. That will be a very entertaining fight. Everybody has
Polo
a shot.
Reyes had one of the most underappreciated fights last year at 199 with the other Dong Yun Kim. I mean, if you missed the prelims, I mean, that was a dynamite fight on what was a really excellent card that night, but totally forgotten after 199.
Yeah, after 199, he had the one fight versus Jason Pepsi Novelli, and it was a split decision victory for him, so it wasn't the most entertaining fight. But you look at the fact that that was the first fight on the card. Fight Pass prelim that most people watch. They pan to the crowd, and there's nobody in the crowd, and it's pound for pound. If you look by action squeezed into, I think the fight is 12 minutes long, 13 minutes long. That is as much entertainment and excitement as you could possibly get. And you got James Vick, who's the local guy from Texas. He's going to have the crowd behind him. That's a fun fight. There's a lot of good fun fights. Dave Branch is coming in here on a 10-fight winning streak. He's looked completely dominant, yet he's the underdog versus Christoph Jocko. Jessica Aguilar, this girl was the number 1 ranked strawweight in the world. Lost to Claudia Gadelha. It was 2 years ago, don't get me wrong. But she's still one of the top, presumably one of the top 115-pound fighters in the world on the prelims. You have all this. Antigulov, Gazman Antigulov, first fight on the card, 12-fight winning streak, 13-fight winning streak. This is a good card. It's fun. It's exciting. It'll be very entertaining. But it's not any one fight. If someone said if you could only watch one fight on the card, there's not that. Well, obviously the main event. It's like, well, there's just a lot of good fights on the card, but nothing one that jumps out beyond everything else.
Let's quickly chat about our 2 championship fights. Stipe Miocic, Junior Dos Santos. I scored the first fight 48-47 for Dos Santos. I mean, he is actually younger by a year than Stipe Miocic, but the miles on Dos Santos to me are far greater. And you just look at these 4 wins that Miocic is coming off of. I have to favor him in this fight. I think Dos Santos has gotten much smarter, though, since that last fight with Miocic and primarily focusing on his boxing. But I am always haunted by that image of that post-fight press conference where Junior Dos Santos looks like a mummy after that Miocic victory. He's got his face all wrapped up in white. I mean, this to me, it's such a close fight to call, but I'm favoring Stipe in this fight. I mean, is this going to primarily come down to whose boxing is superior on Saturday?
Yeah, I'd have to think so. If you look at the last time they fought, Stipe Miocic 1 for 18 on takedowns.
Yeah,
5%.
It was a rough night.
It did not even come close on the takedown department. But he's able to hurt Junior early. He's able to get Junior's attention, use that speed. And the longer that fight goes, Junior starts to figure him out a little bit, then starts to land his own shots. I think takes the tail end. I had the same thing, 48-47 Junior Dos Santos. I thought that he did earn that victory. You look at how they come from there, and you talked about that lasting memory of Junior Dos Santos post-fight from that fight. For me, it's the lasting memory of the third Cain Velasquez fight.
Yeah.
We're heading into the 5th round. He looks like he got hit by a truck and dragged half a mile. He's just done in, and then that's when it became apparent to me that this guy's damaged goods. He's shop-worn. He's a shell of what he used to be because of all this damage, because of all this years of competing, I'm sure. But you just look at the last 2 Cain Velasquez fights, on top of the Stipe Miocic fight, on top of the fact that Alistair Overeem completely knocked him out in a fight that most people didn't see Junior Dos Santos getting KO'd like that. Is more of an accumulative damage is able to take him out, but to one clean shot knock him out, well, you know what? People are writing this guy off, but to his credit, he took a lot of time off. And in that time, you switch camps, you go to American Top Team. Now you're training smarter. You have better training partners. You took a bit of a layoff. I honestly start to feel like This guy's still young for a heavyweight, as you mentioned, younger than the current champion right now, but heavyweights mature at 35, 36 years old. You look at the median age of a top 15 contender at heavyweight, and it's 35 years old. So he's not really all that shop-worn. Yeah, he took a lot of damage, but he took the time off. He reevaluated his situation. He's been working on his speed. And I feel like the version of him that we got against Ben Rothwell, who's smart, who's tactical, who goes out there and takes his time, picks his punches, that's the version you need to take on a guy like Stipe Miocic. Everyone's raving about how good Stipe's been looking right now, but look at the fact that he won the title over Fabricio Verdum, who was charging forward recklessly when he clipped him. So, is that a mistake on Fabricio's part? Was Stipe going to win regardless? I don't know.
No, he gets hit in his fights. I mean, you look at the Overeem fight. I mean, this guy gets hit, and that's definitely a vulnerability.
So that Overeem fight, he gets hit, he's hurt, he's in all types of nasty trouble. But what does Overeem do? Well, he goes for the guillotine. I think he has 11 of them in his career. It's obviously a move he's very comfortable with, and he thought maybe I can get this tap. But against Junior Dos Santos, he's not trying to wring your neck. He's likely creating that space, saying get back up, and then continuing to put the pressure on you. Stipe Miocic is a guy that you've ever met him. He's jovial, and he likes to have a good time, and you see this embedded stuff on him. Ever since he's won the title and he's at Cleveland Cavalier games, he's hanging out with LeBron James, he's enjoying his time as a champion. He very much is so. But I don't want to say he's looking past Junior Dos Santos, but I haven't really met a whole lot of people that are picking Junior Dos Santos in this fight, despite the fact that Junior's already beaten this guy. And even when Junior lost to Kane, you know what the talks were? Poor Junior Dos Santos. He's like Joseph Benavidez. He's so much better than everybody else in the division, but he can't beat the champ. Well, Overeem beats him, and now Cain Velasquez is off the pedestal. The division has basically had a bit of a facelift. You have new contenders in different spots. I'm looking at Junior as a guy that's for dog money, already beaten the champion. He's still in the prime of his career. He looks in fantastic shape. If you watch any of the Countdown special or anything from him on Embedded, he's in great shape. And now that he's training with American Top Team, they've got 8 fighters on the card. This is one of the best gyms in the world. Stipe's still hanging out in Cleveland working at Strong Style Fight Team, where he's presumably the only heavyweight there. I don't know. I just think Junior Dos Santos is kind of being written off. I think he's got a great shot. And if he goes out there and he clips Stipe and he knocks him out, don't be overly surprised.
No, I think there's so many of these fights where you can look at, and I think you can make compelling arguments for both.
All of them.
I mean, Joanna Jędrzejczyk and Jessica Andrade, this is a fight that, much like Jorge Masvidal and Damian Maia, I think this is the opposite. Where given this is a 5-round fight, I think that certainly benefits Jędrzejczyk, but those first 2 rounds I think are going to be very, very pivotal for Jessica Andrade, who I don't know if people are necessarily discounting her ability to win this fight, but it's certainly there.
Yeah, and you look at the blueprint on how you could possibly beat a girl like Joanna Jędrzejczyk, and I think Claudia Gadelha very much gave you that blueprint. She goes out there the first 2 rounds of that rematch, and she takes her down. She dominates those grappling exchanges. She's up 2 rounds. The issue is always going to be how much energy does it cost you to win those first 2 rounds, and can you survive the last 3? If you look at Jessica Andrade, she's arguably stronger than Claudia Gadelha, doesn't really have the same reputable ground game, but she's got a lot of the same tools. Can she go out there? Can she corner her? Can she get the big takedown? And can she work her on the ground? Certainly a possibility. But I look at her run at 135 pounds being a lot similar to what I expect her at 115 pounds. She can hang with almost anybody at 135 as well. We saw her go and fight Liz Carmouche and big Raquel Pennington. Big girls for the division, and she goes out there and she can slam them, John. The issue is that she always got tired fast, and at 135 was going to happen a lot faster than 115 because the size of your opponent's that much bigger, but she was always just getting tired by rounds 2, round 3, she becomes susceptible. I think she can go out there with Joanna Jędrzejczyk and she can put that pressure on her for the first couple rounds, but Joanna has good takedown defense. She's going to be able to sprawl and brawl. She's going to be able to keep the fight standing, and you got to look at who's got more 5-round experience in this division than Joanna Jędrzejczyk. We know that her punch output seemingly never tires, and even in performances like against Valerie Letourneau, where she's seemingly a little bit off, where she's not seemingly the best version of herself that we've ever seen, she's still comfortable enough to go out there and win a fight 4 rounds to 1, 5, maybe even a shutout 5-0. But it's usually in that 3, 4, and 5, the championship rounds. They call them the championship rounds because you got to be a special athlete to be able to thrive in those rounds. And that's exactly what she does. So I do expect this to be somewhat of a close fight, but I'm also looking at the fact that if you're Joanna, your last number of camps have been in Poland, where you were working predominantly with your Polish MMA team. Now that she's at American Top Team, just look at the girls in that room, whether it be Nina Ansaroff, Amanda Nunes, Tisha Torres, Jessica Aguilar. They've got one of the best women's MMA team, and I think Joanna Jędrzejczyk is a very welcome fit to that team. She'll have a plethora of sparring partners that are going to be able to help her out, and I think very much so she'll have the tools to win 3, 4, and 5, likely take the decision. But don't count out her getting a late stoppage if Andrade just gets way too tired from pushing that pace. Claudia Gadelha almost got stopped in the later rounds, and I think that she's in far better physical shape than Andrade, but only time will tell. This is a close fight. I honestly see this card as a card where you cannot write off any of the, as Floyd Mayweather would say, the B-side, because they've all got a very good shot here.
Yeah, I think there's going to be some awful picks come Sunday morning in hindsight, because that's just kind of how this card is looking. Last thing, we did mention Ultimate Fighter from this past week. It was a big win for James Krause over Johnny Nunez, the replacement for Hector Urbina. But man, James Krause got hit in this fight. I mean, he himself said, he wasn't blown away by his performance. I said at the beginning, Krause was my pick to win this entire thing without any knowledge of who does win this whole season. But how did you think James Krause looked in this fight? And did he make more of a believer out of you? Because you're definitely on the, I guess, benefit of the doubt here when it comes to his outcome in this.
Yeah, well, we talked about how this is a lose-lose situation for James Krause, that you're the only guy that's contracted still with the UFC appearing on The Ultimate Fighter. Here's my issue, is that Johnny Nunez, what do you stand to win against Johnny Nunez? Nothing. What do you stand to lose against Johnny Nunez? Everything. So he goes out there, John, and if we didn't know who James Krause was, you know what the talks would have been? Wow, he smoked Johnny Nunez. That's a nice little performance for him. Instead, it's, he got hit one time, He
got hit a few times.
Well, yeah, okay,
Cody.
fair enough. But see, that's the problem with prize fighting. You're going out there, you're not playing basketball, you're not playing tennis. You're going out there and you're fighting somebody. If he goes out there and he gets hit by Nunez and he gets knocked out, what happens to his UFC contract? If you wouldn't have even been getting a contract out of The Ultimate Fighter against Nunez, a guy that's 0-2 in the tough house and effectively fights at 155 pounds, this is not a good look for you. It's all risk, and there's hardly any reward. So yeah, he wins, but the result is I got hit a couple times. I have people thinking to themselves, well, James Krause been off a little while, didn't look particularly good against Johnny Nunez, and now I've got to roll in this format of this tournament where I'm not getting a full camp to fight the next guy. That was one of the worst guys here. He was a replacement on short notice who's only there not because he was the replacement, because he's local to the Las Vegas area and was the replacement. He was just happened to be there. You beat this guy, sure, but now you're stuck in this tournament with guys that are bigger than you, who are as experienced as you, and everything's on the line for what, $100,000? Was that realistically what you were chasing? You could have taken one fight in the UFC, taken your 25 and 25, plus if you got a bonus out of it, that was your $100,000. Instead, you're sticking yourself in a house where you want to fight 3 times for a $100,000 contract. It makes no sense if you're James Krause. And did he look good? Yeah, sure he looked good, but I look at the fact that he's not a welterweight. He's not. He's a 155 pounder that's jumping up a weight class. And you look at some of these guys. Can he beat Hayder Hassan, who's fighting next week? Sure. But look at the prospect of Hayder Hassan, who's a lot bigger than you, standing there throwing wild bombs. Is that really what you want to get yourself into? It's dangerous. These are all dangerous fights. And he's the only guy there that already has a contract. It makes no sense that they even put him in this season, John. And I know I still watch Tough, but this last episode was not very good. And I'm thinking about the next season of Tough, 125-pound women for the title. It's not that I don't care about the talent pool, it's that it's really run its course. We've seen what a season like this looks like, and you're gonna crown a champ who comes to the UFC, and then you're gonna sign the Invicta champ, and they're gonna smash him the same way Esparza got smashed by Jędrzejczyk. Then what was the point of the season?
Was there anything more irritating than Cody Garbrandt drinking with his team?
You know what? It's just like, I feel like that's what Team Alpha Male is like all the time. You know that Alpha Male radio podcast, and they just sit there with no shirts on and have drinks? Like,
just like us.
Yeah, but
you can't see at home.
That's why they took the cameras away from this show, John, because it was just so rowdy in here.
It's tough. You gotta put up with the tough to get to the fights.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
That's going to wrap us up. But Cody, next week we will go through the real winners and losers coming out of UFC 211, and then we'll look ahead to Bellator going back to London, England next week. And they also lost a fight this week because Michael Venom Page is out for his fight with Derek Anderson. So maybe they will rebook that at a later date because they are not finding a replacement for Derek Anderson. But Rory MacDonald will make his way to Bellator against Paul Daley.
Yeah, once again, you talk about fights on paper. Well, Rory MacDonald, you go there, you get the takedown. Yeah, they call him Semtex because he'll explode at any time. And if you're Rory MacDonald, who has bad trouble with that nose, anything can happen. This is a fun fight. Bellator is doing a very good job of creating that intrigue. And hey, I hear Matt Hughes and Chuck Liddell are looking for a place to call home.
Gosh.
So I tell you what, lots of good episodes coming down the road, John.
All right. He's Cody Saftic. You can follow him on Twitter at CJ Saftic. And we're coming back for a full rundown of the UFC 211 card.
Hey, Stevie, what's up, champ? I'm a big fan. I want to do serious, naughty things to you. Whoa! You're an amazing fighter with great personality.
Go ahead.
It was fun seeing everyone you did. Don't touch me. Thanks for your time, champ. Good luck and everything you do. P.S. Send me a dick pic. What the? This guy's crazy.
All right, and before we call it a show, let us look at the UFC 211 card. It's coming up Saturday night from the American Airlines Center in Dallas, Texas, the same venue where Joanna Jędrzejczyk became the women's strawweight champion in March of 2015, defeating Carla Esparza, who was the inaugural champion at 115 pounds. Going back to Dallas will be Jędrzejczyk looking to extend her unbeaten mark. We've been talking about it all show. It's a really great card. The Fight Pass portion will feature 4 fights, including Jessica Aguilar taking on Courtney Casey. That kicks off at 6:15 Eastern Time. The prelims will air on FX this time around for those of you stateside. For you viewers in Canada, it will be on TSN 5. And these prelims, it'll feature Marco Polo Reyes taking on James Vick, Jason Knight and Chas Skelly, which is another fight that's kind of falling under the radar. Chas Skelly is a real outstanding performer, and Jason Knight himself, really fun style to watch as well. I like that one stylistically quite a lot. And what more can be said about Eddie Alvarez and Dustin Poirier? First time we have seen Eddie Alvarez since the loss to Conor McGregor back in November. And with Dustin Poirier, this is one of those fights that I don't see how this can possibly disappoint given both of their styles. And Eddie Alvarez, I mean, certainly you can look at the overall tenure that he has had in the UFC, has certainly gotten hit a lot in some of these fights, but in particular, it's kind of been live by the sword, die by the sword throughout Eddie Alvarez's career. And when he did fight, altering his style somewhat for Anthony Pettis, for instance, I mean, that was the smart fight for Eddie Alvarez, and he got a lot of criticism over it. And Dustin Poirier, he's another guy that I think you have seen alterations to his style as well, incorporating more wrestling like he did against Joseph Duffy, and not just going out there and just swinging with a guy. But this is one of those fights where that's kind of the expectation they have, and I think both guys are not going to necessarily be reckless, even though that's kind of what's expected in that fight. Pay-per-view, we'll see David Branch, Krzysztof Jotko. David Branch has, a double champion at World Series of Fighting in 2 separate weight classes, comes in with some momentum against Krzysztof Jotko. So this is a real test for him in his first fight. Jotko 19-1. And from that point on, I mean, look at some of these fights. Frankie Edgar and Yair Rodriguez is one of the more interesting ones on the show, because Yair Rodriguez has superstar written all over him. He has a style that is so transferable to any of your audience. I think that for anyone that is maybe not a stringent follower of mixed martial arts, you watch Yair Rodriguez, you can really gravitate towards this personality and this style of fighting. It's really something to watch, especially at the high level that he's competing at. Frankie Edgar, though, is someone who's been through many wars, but at 35, I don't think anyone is discounting where Frankie Edgar still stands, whether he is at featherweight, whether he is looking at bantamweight as a possible avenue to explore. The thing with Yair Rodriguez's style is that he takes lots of risks. Because of that Taekwondo style, he does things that for the negative is that it's very hard for a Frankie Edgar to have someone in his gym mimic Yair Rodriguez. However, for Frankie Edgar's style, that style of Rodriguez leaves himself open for takedowns. And if that becomes a pattern that Frankie Edgar can figure out, and putting Yair Rodriguez on his back, I have flashbacks to Frankie Edgar, Cub Swanson, where he put Swanson down and dominated him on top. Frankie Edgar on top of you is a really bad night for Yair Rodriguez. Rodriguez is making a big leap in this weight class, and this is kind of putting all your chips on the table, because a win for Yair Rodriguez, he has to cash out with a title fight after this win if he can beat Frankie Edgar. A win from Frankie Edgar becomes more of a tricky situation at featherweight, because I can't see him getting another fight with Jose Aldo, especially in such proximity to his most recent loss to Aldo at UFC 200 last summer. Max Holloway, that presents a different scenario for Frankie Edgar. Damian Maia takes on Jorge Masvidal, another fight that will have championship implications because Tyron Woodley is sitting without an opponent at this moment, and who knows what kind of situation the welterweight division is going to be in if this Bisping-George St-Pierre fight does fall apart. Damian Maia getting the win, that would be 10 straight. But Jorge Masvidal, this is someone that is just firing on all cylinders at the moment, had a tremendous 2016. The move to welterweight has been an extraordinary positive for Masvidal and is coming off a signature victory over Donald Cerrone. He feels he's been at this level for a long time, and now he's starting to get that focus. As Cody outlined, Damian Maia is someone that can tire. It's 15 minutes, and I have a really hard time picking against Damian Maia, just given some of the dangerous strikers he has been able to subdue. Will this fight be reminiscent of Rory MacDonald, where he starts strong, but Rory figured him out and was able to win that 3-round decision? Or will this be more like the Matt Brown fight, where you had a very dangerous striker that Damian Maia was able to figure out, was able to take down? The first round is going to tell you a lot if he can get Masvidal down and be able to dictate his game on the ground. Masvidal feels he has an answer no matter where this fight goes. It's a very intriguing fight. It was a big risk for both individuals to take this fight, in particular Maia, who you have to think Tyron Woodley, they want a fight for him, but doesn't have any contenders at this moment until this fight plays out. Joanna Jędrzejczyk takes on Jessica Andrade. Jędrzejczyk 13-0, looking to make her latest championship title defense as she is returning to the site of her victory for that title. Now 7-0 in the UFC. Last year saw wins over Claudia Gadelha and Karolina Kowalkiewicz. You know, a lot was made of the Kowalkiewicz fight, and in particular, the right hand that did land. And I think Mike Thomas Brown was right in the countdown show that it was just such a flawless performance that one shot landing was somewhat, that became such a big focus on a punch landing. It was a solid shot, but Joanna ate it, and she came back, and she won the 5th, and I don't think you can really fault that performance at all. I do like Jędrzejczyk in this fight. I think she is certainly the quicker fighter. That's no question. And what does a Jessica Andrade look like in rounds 4 and 5? I think Angela Hill was a good indicator of dealing with someone who was much quicker than Andrade. But Jędrzejczyk, certainly her speed is a big element of her game. She struggled a little bit in the early going of the second Gadelha fight, but someone that when she does find that rhythm, it becomes bulletproof to break. And I think that in this kind of a fight, Jessica Andrade, it becomes very difficult when you have to mortgage your conditioning over the course of 25 minutes when you're used to 15. And this is still a relatively new weight class for Jessica Andrade, only 3 fights deep at 115 pounds. So Jędrzejczyk is my pick in this fight, but Jessica Andrade certainly a live dog in this particular title fight. Stipe Miocic and Junior Dos Santos, very, very close. The first fight was very close. I scored it 48-47 that night for Junior Dos Santos. Since that time, he was stopped by Alistair Overeem. He's coming off the win over Ben Rothwell. This is someone that, he really felt the effects of that fight with Stipe Miocic. He didn't even fight for a significant time period afterwards, and it was about a year until he fought Overeem. And then when you look at the Ben Rothwell fight, that was certainly one where you saw Junior Dos Santos, a much more conservative Junior Dos Santos, and one that very much respected his own boxing, and that was what got him to the dance, and that is where he is significantly ahead of many within the heavyweight division. I would include Stipe Miocic in there. He has very good hands. Stipe Miocic takes a lot of risk in fights, and it happened in the Verdum fight. It certainly happened in the Overeem fight. This guy will get hit, and it's managing that damage and being able to take risks, but also capitalize on mistakes by Junior Dos Santos. As we talked about earlier, not a very successful night wrestling-wise for Stipe Miocic the first time around. So if you are assessing this fight as these two guys in a boxing match, that makes a compelling argument for Junior Dos Santos. With Stipe Miocic, I just feel that he is someone that has taken less damage since that first fight in 2014, and he's been able to find the chin of a lot of significant heavyweights. When you are looking at a murderer's row of Mark Hunt, of Fabricio Verdum, of Alistair Overeem, yeah, Andrei Arlovsky is not the same Andrei Arlovsky of old, but that was a destructive finish in January of last year, which clinched him the title shot against Verdum last June. Miocic is now very accustomed to high-pressure situations, whether it was fighting in Brazil amongst those tens of thousands in attendance, or the opposite of being the hometown hero headlining a card in Cleveland. This is a guy that doesn't get rattled by the situation that he finds himself in. And for Junior Dos Santos, there's a lot of pressure on him, knowing that this could very well be his last opportunity at a championship belt. And for a 33-year-old, that's a lot of pressure to go into a fight like this, and also being out for the last 13 months since that Rothwell win. So my pick is Stipe Miocic in this fight. Certainly will not stun me at all if Junior Dos Santos is able to outbox and win this fight against Miocic. It's a really tough fight to call in the main event of UFC 211. It's an excellent card. It's going down Saturday night, all starting at 6:15 Eastern Time. And that's going to bring an end to the MMA Report. I want to thank Cody Saftic for joining me, as well as all of you for listening. You can subscribe to the MMA Report with John Pollock on iTunes, or you can subscribe to Live Audio Wrestling. It's part of that feed as well. We do appreciate any of your feedback that you can provide on iTunes. If you leave a review of the show, it's greatly appreciated. Just getting our ranking up there as well, and hopefully more people will hear the show. And you can follow me at I am John Pollock on Twitter. I've also just joined Instagram. I'm the last person to join Instagram at the same handle. I am John Pollock. I have no photos posted yet, but maybe I will post one this week. We'll see. I'm going into this very leery. I'm not big on Instagram, but I'm told I need it, so I've dove in head first. That is it, everyone. You've heard my voice enough. Enjoy the fights on Saturday, and we'll chat with you next week.